The Galactic Assembly Chamber had never been so crowded. And Ambassador Yunsira stood at the speaking platform once again, surrounded by the angry voices of 100 species demanding answers. 30 days had passed since Operation Silent Thunder, and the galaxy had not stopped talking about what the humans had done. "This is an outrage," High Arbiter Desix declared, the ancient amphibian's voice trembling with a fury that Yunsira had never heard before. "And the human delegation has violated every protocol of non-interference that this assembly has maintained for 10,000 years. We have," Yunsira acknowledged calmly, "and I am prepared to explain why." The chamber erupted in more shouting, but Yunsira stood firm and waited for the noise to subside. She had spent 30 days preparing for this moment, and she would not be intimidated by the anger of species who had done nothing while billions died. "Before I speak further," Yunsira said when the chamber finally quieted, "I would like to introduce two guests who have asked to address this assembly." She turned and gestured toward the entrance, and the chamber fell into stunned silence as two figures emerged from the shadows. The first was a Veluxi, her insectoid body gleaming under the chamber lights and her compound eyes reflecting the faces of the assembled delegates. The second was a Kreth, his silicon form towering over the Veluxi beside him, his crystalline face unreadable. "First speaker Vexrus of the Veluxi Collective," Yunsira announced, "and Warfather Krethanel of the Kreth Dominion." The silence stretched on as the two former enemies walked to the speaking platform and stood beside the human ambassador. For 47 years, these species had been trying to destroy each other, and now they stood together in the heart of the Galactic Assembly. "This is unprecedented," Desix managed to say, "and the Assembly does not recognize the right of belligerent species to address this chamber during active conflict." "There is no active conflict," First Speaker Vexrus said, her voice carrying the strange harmonics of the Veluxi hive mind. "And the Collective has signed a ceasefire with the Kreth Dominion." "As have we," Warfather Krethanel added in his deep, resonant tone, "and negotiations for permanent peace are ongoing." The chamber exploded into chaos, and it took several minutes for Desix to restore order when silence finally returned. The High Arbiter fixed Yunsira with a cold stare. "How dare you," Desix said quietly. "And how dare you interfere in a conflict that was not your concern? And how dare you violate the protocols that have maintained galactic stability for millennia?" Yunsira took a deep breath and stepped forward. "You are right," she said. "And we violated your protocols, and we attacked two species without provocation. And we acted without permission from this assembly. Then you admit your guilt," Desix demanded. "I admit that we broke your rules," Yunsira replied. "But I do not admit guilt, because guilt implies wrongdoing. And I do not believe that saving 40 billion lives is wrong." She turned to face the full assembly, her voice rising to reach every delegate in the chamber. "For 47 years you watched the Veluxi War burn across 3 star systems," she said. "And for 47 years, you debated containment protocols and acceptable casualty rates while billions of sentient beings died. You had the power to intervene at any time," she continued. "And you chose not to, and you told yourselves that non-interference was the moral choice. But non-interference is still a choice," she declared. "And when you choose to do nothing while people die, you are responsible for those deaths. The human delegation will not lecture this assembly on morality," Desix interrupted. "Then let me lecture you instead," First Speaker Vexrus said. And the chamber fell silent at the unexpected words. The Veluxi leader turned to face the delegates, her compound eyes reflecting their faces. "The Collective did not ask for human intervention," she said. "And when their ships appeared at our gates, we prepared to destroy them. But they did not come to conquer. They came to stop us," she continued. And in 4 minutes, they accomplished what 47 years of hatred had made us forget was possible. They reminded us that war is a choice, she finished, and that we could choose differently. War Father Crethanol stepped forward, his massive form casting shadows across the speaking platform. The Dominion does not thank the humans for their attack, he said. And we lost warriors who deserved to die in honorable combat. Not in a surprise assault by a species we had ignored, but the humans showed us something we had forgotten, he added. And they showed us that strength is not just the ability to destroy, but the courage to stand between enemies and demand peace. We will remember this lesson, he concluded, and the Dominion honors those who taught it to us. Desix looked from the Veluxi to the Kreth to the human ambassador. And for the first time, the ancient creature seemed uncertain. The Assembly will vote on sanctions against the human delegation, Desix announced finally. And all those in favor of censure and punishment will signal now. The voting took only minutes. And when it was finished, the sanctions had failed. Too many smaller species had voted against punishment. Species whose worlds had been threatened by the expanding war. Species who understood what the humans had risked to save them. Yunsira allowed herself a small smile as the results were announced. But she did not celebrate. There was still too much work to do as the delegates began to file out of the chamber. A small reptilian creature approached her with quick, nervous steps. Ambassador Yoon, the creature said. My name is the Sarivorn, and I represent the Morthani people. I know who you are, Yunsira replied, and I know that your homeworld was in the projected path of the war. 40 billion, the Sarivorn said quietly. And that was the number your admiral mentioned. And my people would have been among them. The small creature reached out and took Yunsira's hand in a gesture that crossed species boundaries. You saved us, the Sarivorn said, and we will never forget. Yunsira felt her throat tighten, but she kept her composure. We did not do this alone, she said, and the Veluxi and Kreth chose to stop fighting, and this assembly will help build the peace, and many hands will shape what comes next. But you started it, the Sarivorn insisted. And someone had to start it. The creature released her hand and walked away, leaving Yunsira standing alone in the emptying chamber. She thought about the 11 ships that had been destroyed during the operation, and the 200 crew members who had died to make this moment possible. She thought about Lieutenant Beek Suman, who had refused to eject from her damaged fighter and had somehow survived to become a hero. She thought about Commander O. Taejin, who had led his strike force into impossible odds and brought most of them home, and she thought about all the lives that would be lived because of what they had done. The children who would be born on worlds that no longer feared the spreading war. It had been worth it. She decided the records of the Galactic Assembly would list Operation Silent Thunder as humanity's first and last unsanctioned military intervention, not because humanity was punished for their actions, but because after that day, when humans spoke at the assembly, the elder species listened, and that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. The Karath system blazed with weapons fire as Strike Force 7 emerged from faster-than-light travel directly between the Veluxi and Kreth defense fleets. Commander Otajan had exactly 4 minutes to change the course of galactic history. All ships, execute attack pattern Delta, he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos of alarms and tactical updates. And remember that we disable, not destroy. The 12 human ships split into 3 groups and accelerated toward their targets with a speed that made the alien defenders hesitate. Humans, their sensors told them that made no sense. Humans were a minor species with a small fleet, and they had no stake in this war. What were they doing here? That moment of confusion cost the defenders 30 precious seconds. And in those seconds, the human ships closed the distance and opened fire. the HSS Defiance led the assault on the Veluxy command station. Her precision cannons targeting weapon systems and shield generators with surgical accuracy. Commander O watched the damage report scroll across his screen and felt a grim satisfaction as the station's defensive grid went dark. Station weapons offline, his tactical officer reported. And we have 17 Veluxy interceptors moving to engage. Fighter squadrons, clear us a path. Commander O ordered Lieutenant Beak. Suman heard the command through her helmet speakers and pushed her fighter into a steep dive toward the incoming interceptors. The Veluxy ships were fast and maneuvered with the perfect coordination of a hive mind. But Suman had something they could not predict. She had instinct. Her fighter twisted through a barrage of energy fire, pulling a turn that would have killed a pilot from any other species. Human bodies could endure acceleration that would crush Veluxy exoskeletons. And Sumin used that advantage ruthlessly. She disabled 2 interceptors with precise shots to their engine arrays, then rolled away from a third that had tried to flank her. Interceptor wing broken, she reported. And path is clear for the Defiance on the other side of the gate. The Kreth defenders had recovered from their surprise and were launching a coordinated counterattack. 3 human destroyers faced a wall of Kreth warships, their shields flickering under the relentless assault. Captain Yun Ji-hoon commanded the destroyer HSS Relentless, and he knew his ship could not survive a prolonged engagement. But he did not need to survive. He needed to last 4 minutes. All power to forward shields, he ordered. Then keep firing on those communication relays. The Relentless shuddered as a Kreth plasma bolt struck her port side. But the shields held and the ship kept advancing. The communication relays were the key to the entire operation. And if they could destroy them, then neither the Veluxy nor the Kreth would be able to call for reinforcements. 2 minutes had passed across the conflict zone. The other 6 strike forces were fighting their own desperate battles at Nexus Gate Theraxis. Strike Force 3 had lost 2 ships, but had successfully disabled the gate's defensive platforms at Nexus Gate Vorint. Strike Force 5 was engaged in a brutal close-range fight with Kreth boarding parties who had managed to breach one of their cruisers. But everywhere the human ships were holding, they were taking damage and losing crew members. But they were holding. Commander O checked the mission clock and saw that 3 minutes had passed. All ships prepared to deploy communication blockers, he ordered. And stand by for broadcast. The communication blockers were humanity's secret weapon. Devices that would flood every frequency with static and prevent either side from coordinating their forces. Once activated, the Veluxy hive mind would be unable to communicate with its distant fleets, and the Kreth command structure would collapse into chaos. Lieutenant Suman's fighter had taken a hit during her last engagement, and her navigation computer was offline. She was flying on manual control now, using nothing but her eyes and her instincts to guide her through the battle. A Kreth heavy cruiser loomed ahead, its weapons tracking her fighter as she approached. She should have pulled away, should have let one of the destroyers handle it. But there was no time. The cruiser's communication array was still active. And if it sent a distress call, then reinforcements would arrive before the 4 minutes were up. Suman pushed her throttle to maximum and dove toward the cruiser's exposed communication dish. Energy blasts streaked past her cockpit, so close that she could feel the heat through her flight suit. She fired once, twice, 3 times, and the communication array exploded in a shower of sparks. Target destroyed, she reported, her voice shaking with adrenaline. And I am heading back to the Defiance. Negative, Lieutenant. Commander O replied. Your ship is too damaged to land safely. So eject, and we will recover you after the mission. With respect. Commander, I still have weapons and engines, Suman said, and I am not leaving until the job is done. There was a pause. And then, Commander O's voice came back with something that might have been pride. "Understood, Lieutenant. And stay close to the formation. 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Deploy communication blockers." Commander O ordered. "And begin broadcast on all frequencies." Every human ship in the core system activated their blockers simultaneously, and the carefully coordinated Veluxi and Kreth fleets suddenly found themselves deaf and blind at the same moment. A message began broadcasting on every frequency that either species used, and it was a message that would be heard across 7 star systems at once. "This is Commander O Tajin of the Earth Defense Force," the recording announced. "And this war ends now. Your Nexus gates are under human control," the message continued. "And your fleets cannot reach each other, and in 72 hours we will open negotiations on neutral ground. Attend, or your gates remain closed forever. Humanity has spoken." The weapon's fire began to slow as the message repeated. And across 7 systems the impossible had happened. 4 minutes had passed, and the human ships were still standing. Commander O watched as the Veluxi and Kreth vessels began to power down their weapons, and he allowed himself one moment to breathe. They had done it. In 4 minutes, 84 human ships had accomplished what 47 years of galactic diplomacy had failed to achieve. They had forced the end of a war. The cost had been high, and as the damage reports came in, Commander O felt the weight of every life lost. 11 ships destroyed across all 7 strike forces, over 200 crew members dead, but the gates were secure, and the message had been sent, and now it was up to the diplomats to finish what the soldiers had started. "All ships secure from battle stations," Commander O ordered, "and begin recovery operations for damaged vessels and ejected crew." He turned to look out the bridge window at the Nexus gate floating in the darkness for 47 years. That gate had been a symbol of endless war. Now it would become a symbol of something else. It would become the place where humanity proved that they were not too young or too small to matter. They were exactly what the galaxy needed. The carrier HSS Defiance drifted in the darkness between stars. Her running lights dimmed and her engines cold to avoid detection by the patrol ships that swept through this region every 6 hours. Commander O Tajin stood on the bridge, watching the countdown timer that showed 37 hours until Operation Silent Thunder began around him. His crew moved with quiet efficiency, checking systems and running simulations for the 100-time Strike Force 7 consisted of 12 ships, each one carrying a crew of 30 highly trained specialists who had volunteered for a mission that most military experts would call suicide. They were positioned near Nexus Gate Korath, one of 7 ancient transit points that had become the center of a war that had lasted longer than most. Human nations in the ready room below the bridge. Lieutenant Beeksuman sat alone, staring at a photograph of her family that she had taped to the wall. She was 26 years old, and she had been flying combat missions since she was 22. But nothing in her training had prepared her for what they were about to attempt. The door opened, and Commander O stepped inside, his face showing the calm determination that had earned him the respect of everyone under his command. "You should be resting," he said gently. "I tried," Suman replied, "but every time I close my eyes I see the battle simulations." Commander O nodded and sat down across from her. "Do you know why I recommended you for this mission?" he asked. Suman shook her head. "Because when we ran the simulations, you were the only pilot who consistently found solutions that the computer had not predicted," he explained. "And that kind of creative thinking is exactly what we need when everything goes wrong." "What if I freeze?" Suman asked. "And what if the pressure is too much and I fail when it matters most?" "Then you will fail," Commander O said simply, "and someone else will complete the mission. And we will mourn you as a hero who gave everything for something greater than herself." It was not the comforting answer Suman had expected, but somehow it helped. There was no pretense in Commander O. No false promises that everything would be fine. He treated her like an adult who understood the stakes. "Why are we doing this?" Suman asked. "And, I mean really, not the official reasons about saving neutral worlds and ending the war." Commander O was quiet for a moment. And when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that Suman had never heard before. "When I was a child," he said, "my grandmother told me a story about two neighbors who had been fighting for so long that they had forgotten why they started. And they just kept hurting each other because that was all they knew how to do." "What happened to them?" Suman asked. "Nothing," Commander O replied, "because no one was willing to step between them and say enough. And they destroyed each other while everyone else watched." He stood up and walked to the small window that looked out into the void. "The Veluxi and Kreth have been fighting for 47 years, he continued. "And the Assembly has been watching for 47 years. And in all that time, no one has been willing to stand between them and risk getting hurt from both sides. And that is what we are doing," Suman said. "Standing between them." "Yes," Commander O confirmed. "And we will get hit from both sides, and some of us will not survive. But if we do not act, then they will keep killing each other forever while the galaxy watches." The ship's communication system chimed, and the voice of the tactical officer filled the room. "Commander, we have received confirmation from all 7 strike forces, and Admiral Park has transmitted the final authorization codes." "Understood," Commander O replied. "And begin final preparations for deployment." He turned back to Suman with a slight smile. "Get some rest, Lieutenant, because in 36 hours you will need every bit of skill you possess." Suman nodded and watched him leave, then turned back to the photograph of her family. Her mother and father stood in front of their small house in Bizen, and her younger brother was making a silly face at the camera. They did not know where she was or what she was about to do. And if everything went wrong, they would never know the truth. She would just be another casualty in a war that had nothing to do with them. But that was not quite true. She realized the 40 billion people who would die if the war expanded had families too. And they had mothers and fathers and brothers who loved them. If she could help save even a fraction of those lives, then whatever happened to her would be worth it. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her. And for the first time in weeks, she did not dream of battle simulations. Instead, she dreamed of a galaxy at peace, where ships traveled between stars for trade and exploration instead of war. When she woke, there were 12 hours left on the countdown. The final briefing took place in the Defiance's main hangar, where all 360 crew members of Strike Force 7 gathered to hear Commander O speak. "In 12 hours we will jump to the Korath system," he announced, "and we will engage Veluxi and Kreth forces simultaneously in an operation that has never been attempted in the history of galactic warfare." He paused and looked at the faces before him, seeing fear and determination and hope. "I will not lie to you and say that we will all survive," he continued, "because some of us will not come home, and we know this. But what I can tell you is that what we do today will matter," he said. "And 100 years from now, when our grandchildren read about the end of the Veluxi-Kreth War, they will know that it was humans who stood up when no one else would. They will know that we were small and young and inexperienced by galactic standards," he added. "But they will also know that we had something the elder species had lost. We had the courage to act." He straightened to attention and saluted. "It has been my honor to serve with every one of you," he said, "and I will see you on the other side." The crew saluted back, and then dispersed to their stations 12 hours later. Strike Force 7 jumped to faster-than-light speed across the conflict zone. 6 other strike forces did the same operation Silent Thunder had begun. The Earth Defense Council chamber sat deep beneath the mountains of Geneva, protected by 300 meters of rock and the most advanced shielding technology humanity had ever created. Fleet Admiral Park Junho stood at the head of the long table, his uniform pressed and his face calm, but his eyes carried the intensity of a man who had already made a decision that would change history. Ladies and gentlemen, he began. 3 weeks ago, the Galactic Assembly voted to extend their containment protocols for the Veluxi-Kreth War. And they did so knowing that the conflict will spread into neutral territory. Within 18 months, the council members shifted in their seats, and Admiral Park could see the tension in their faces. They knew why they had been called here, and they knew that whatever came next would not be easy. Intelligence Director Chuan Murray will present our analysis, Admiral Park said, and he stepped aside to let his colleague take the floor. Director Quan was a small woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for seeing patterns that others missed, and she moved to the display screen with the confidence of someone who had spent months preparing for this moment. The current projections show the war expanding along 3 vectors. She began, and the screen filled with a map of the conflict zone. And within 18 months, the fighting will reach the Morthani homeworld, the Tesserae colonies, and the Vranthi trade stations. Red lines spread across the map like blood vessels. And the council members watched in silence as neutral worlds disappeared into the projected war zone. Total estimated casualties among non-combatant species, Director Quan continued, is 40 billion sentient beings. The number hung in the air, and Admiral Park saw several council members close their eyes. We have no treaty obligations to any of these species, said Councillor Han Himan, a veteran diplomat who had spent 30 years navigating galactic politics. And intervention would violate the Assembly's containment protocols and potentially turn both the Veluxi and Kreth against us. That is correct, Admiral Park acknowledged. And I am not here to pretend that what I am proposing is safe or easy. Then what exactly are you proposing? Councillor Han asked. Admiral Park nodded to Director Quan, who changed the display to show a different map. One focused on 7 specific points scattered across the conflict zone. These are the Nexus Gates, Director Quan explained. And they are ancient, faster-than-light transit points that allow ships to cross vast distances in seconds. And they are the key to this entire war. We know about the gates, said Councillor Shin Yin-hee, who oversaw military affairs, and both sides have been fighting over them for decades. Exactly, Director Quan said, because whoever controls the gates controls the flow of the war, and neither side can capture them because they are too heavily defended by both fleets. Simultaneously, the Veluxi and Kreth have essentially created a stalemate around each gate, Admiral Park added, and they cannot break that stalemate without leaving their own territories exposed to attack. So the war continues forever, Councillor Han said, because neither side can win the gates unless someone else takes them, Admiral Park said. The chamber fell silent, and every eye turned to the Admiral with a mixture of shock and disbelief. You cannot be serious, Councillor Shin said slowly, because you are talking about attacking both species at once. I am talking about ending a 47-year war in a single coordinated strike, Admiral Park replied. And I am talking about saving 40 billion lives. He stepped back to the display and highlighted the 7 Nexus Gates. We have spent the last 3 weeks analyzing every battle, every patrol pattern, and every weakness in both fleets, he explained. And we have identified a 4-minute window during each standard day cycle when the defenses around each gate are at their weakest. 4 minutes, Councillor Han repeated. And you think we can capture 7 gates in 4 minutes? Not capture, Admiral Park said, but disable and hold long enough to broadcast a message that neither side can ignore. Director Quan brought up a new display showing fleet positions and attack vectors. Operation Silent Thunder will deploy 7 strike forces of 12 ships each, she explained. And each force will be equipped with our latest stealth technology, and precision weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. We are not trying to win a war, Admiral Park emphasized, but we are trying to create a situation where both sides have no choice but to negotiate. And if they refuse to negotiate, Counselor Shin asked, "What then?" "Then we hold the gates," Admiral Park said simply. "And we cut off their ability to reach each other. And we wait until they realize that talking is better than starving." The council members exchanged looks, and Admiral Park could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. This was madness, their expression said. And yet it was also the only plan anyone had proposed that might actually work. "The Assembly will condemn us," Counselor Han said. "The Assembly has condemned 40 billion people to death through their inaction," Admiral Park replied. "And I would rather face their anger than their indifference." "What about our own casualties?" Counselor Shin asked. "Because 12 ships against the combined defenses of 2 hostile fleets does not sound like favorable odds. We will take losses," Admiral Park admitted. "And I will not pretend otherwise, but our pilots are volunteers who understand what they are fighting for. And they believe this mission is worth the risk. You have already recruited crews?" Counselor Han asked with surprise. "I have briefed 7 commanders on the general outline of the operation," Admiral Park said. "And every one of them agreed to participate if the Council authorizes the mission." The chamber fell silent again, and Admiral Park let the weight of the moment settle over them. This was the decision point, the place where history would turn one way or another. "We have 2 choices," he said finally. "And we can follow the Assembly's lead and watch 40 billion people die over the next decade. Or we can act and accept the consequences of that action." "You are asking us to start a war," Counselor Shin said. "No," Admiral Park replied. "I am asking you to end one." The vote took an hour, and when it was finished, Operation Silent Thunder had been authorized by a margin of 1 vote. Admiral Park stood at attention as the council members filed out. And when the chamber was empty, he allowed himself one moment of doubt. They were about to attack 2 species that had been fighting for longer than humanity had known about the stars. And they were doing it with 84 ships against fleets that numbered in the thousands. It was impossible, he thought. But then again, humanity had always excelled at doing the impossible. He turned to Director Quan, who had remained behind. "Begin deployment," he ordered. "And tell the commanders that we launch in 6 weeks." Director Quan nodded and left to carry out his orders. Admiral Park stood alone in the empty chamber, looking at the map of the conflict zone. "They think we are too small to matter," he said to himself. "So let us show them what small and fast can do." The great chamber of the Galactic Assembly stretched upward like the inside of a hollow mountain, and Ambassador Yoon Sera stood at its lowest point, surrounded by hundreds of alien delegates who looked down at her from their elevated platforms. She had been waiting for 3 hours to speak, and in that time she had watched the elder species argue about supply routes, refugee quotas, and the acceptable number of casualties per standard galactic year. The Veluxy-Kreth War had raged for 47 years, and the Assembly had done nothing but watch it burn. High Arbiter Thesix, an ancient amphibian creature with pale blue skin and eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, raised one webbed hand to silence the chamber. "We have reviewed the latest reports from the conflict zone," Thesix announced in a voice that echoed through the vast space. "And the Council of Elders recommends extending our containment protocols for another 10 standard years." Yoon Sera felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her face calm. Around her, delegates from dozens of species nodded their approval, their various heads and appendages moving in agreement with the decision to do nothing. The Veluxy were an insectoid species that shared one mind across billions of bodies, and they had been fighting the Kreth since before humanity discovered fire. The Kreth were silicon-based warriors who lived for combat and honor, and they viewed the Veluxy as an infection that needed to be burned from the galaxy. Between them, 3 star systems had been reduced to graveyards, and the death toll had long since passed the point where numbers meant anything. The Assembly recognizes the human delegation, Thesic said, and there was a slight tone of impatience in the ancient creature's voice. Yunsira stepped forward to the speaking platform, aware that every eye and sensor in the chamber had turned toward her. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 200 years ago, which made them infants by the standards of species that had traveled between stars for millennia. Honored delegates, Yunsira began, her voice steady and clear. I have listened to 3 hours of discussion about how to manage this war, but I have not heard a single proposal to end it. A ripple of murmurs passed through the chamber, and Yunsira saw several delegates exchange looks of amusement. The human was young and naive. Their expressions seemed to say, and she did not understand how the galaxy worked. The Veluxy-Kreth conflict is a matter of ancient grievances, said Ambassador Vrex of the Tyrillian Consortium, a tall insectoid creature who bore a slight resemblance to the Veluxy, but was in fact an entirely different species. And it is not the place of the Assembly to interfere in the internal affairs of sovereign peoples. Internal affairs, Yunsira repeated, and she let the words hang in the air for a moment. Ambassador Vrex, the war has killed 14 billion sentient beings in the last decade alone, and it is spreading toward neutral territory, which is why we have containment protocols. Thesic replied with the patience of someone explaining a simple concept to a child. And the protocols have kept the conflict from expanding beyond acceptable boundaries. Acceptable to whom? Yunsira asked. The chamber fell silent, and Yunsira pressed forward before anyone could respond. The Morthani homeworld lies 6 light years from the current front line, and military projections suggest the war will reach their system within 18 months, she said, and that the Sari colony worlds are already receiving refugees they cannot support, and the economic damage to neutral shipping lanes has destabilized trade across an entire sector. These are regrettable consequences, Thesic acknowledged, but direct intervention would only prolong the conflict and increase casualties. How can you know that if you have never tried? Yunsira demanded. Another ripple of murmurs, but this time they carried a different tone, and Yunsira recognized the sound of irritation. She was pushing too hard, asking questions that the elder species did not want to answer. Young ambassador, said a voice from high above, and Yunsira looked up to see the ancient crystalline form of Elder Morvith, one of the oldest beings in the known galaxy. You speak with the passion of a species that has not yet learned the weight of history, and while your concern is admirable, you must understand that some conflicts cannot be resolved through intervention. Why not? Yunsira asked. Because the Veluxy and Kreth do not wish for resolution, Morvith replied, and they have rejected every peace proposal offered in the last 4 decades. And they will continue fighting until one side or the other is destroyed. Then perhaps they need something other than proposals. Yunsira said. The chamber erupted in noise, and Yunsira stood firm as dozens of voices shouted over each other. She had said something dangerous, something that violated the unspoken rules of the Assembly, and she could see the alarm in the eyes of delegates who had previously ignored her. The human delegation will clarify its statement, Thesic commanded. And for the first time, the High Arbiter's voice carried an edge of warning. I am suggesting nothing specific, Yunsira said carefully, but I am asking this assembly to consider that doing nothing is also a choice. And it is a choice that has cost 14 billion lives. We have heard your concerns, Thesic said, and they will be noted in the official record. But the matter before us today is the extension of containment protocols, and we will now proceed to a vote. The vote took less than 5 minutes. And when it was finished, the containment protocols had been extended by another 10 years. Humanity abstained, and no one seemed to notice or care. As the delegates began to file out of the chamber, Yunsira remained at the speaking platform, watching the elder species return to their comfortable routines. A hand touched her shoulder, and she turned to find her aide, a young man named Cho Hyun-woo, standing beside her with a secure communication device. Earth Command is waiting, Hyun-woo said quietly. Yunsira nodded and took the device, stepping into a private alcove where the sound dampeners would protect her words from curious ears. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Fleet Admiral Park Jun-ho, and his expression told her that he had already heard the news. They said no. Yunsira reported. Admiral Park nodded slowly, and his eyes were hard with determination. Then we proceed to the next phase, he said. Are you certain about this? Yunsira asked. Because if we act without assembly approval, we will be violating every treaty we have signed since joining the galactic community. I am certain of one thing, Admiral Park replied, and that is 40 billion more people will die if we do nothing. And I am not willing to accept that. Yunsira closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of what they were about to do. When she opened them again, her resolve had hardened. What do you need from me? She asked. Stay at the assembly, Admiral Park said, and keep them distracted for as long as possible, and when the time comes, be ready to speak for humanity again. They will not listen, Yunsira said. Admiral Park smiled, but there was no humor in it. After what we are about to do, he said, they will have no choice. The communication ended and Yunsira stood alone in the alcove, listening to the distant sounds of delegates discussing trade agreements and cultural exchanges. They had no idea what was coming. She thought none of them understood what humanity was capable of when pushed to act. In 6 weeks, the galaxy would learn.